Welcome to Writing the Wrong Way, where we talk about how writing works, how writers work, and how the best writers risk being strange. I'm here with GMB Chomichuk, who, among other things, is the author of The Automatic Age and Backbone of Night, the newest Automatic Age book. So, Gregory, I just wanted to ask you for initially, what are some of the... We were talking before we kicked on here about questions we don't get asked or do get asked, and what are some of the things that you always get asked that you just find maddening to answer, versus what are some of the things that you wish people would ask you or just be more curious about?
Right. People always ask you, what was your inspiration for the book? They always ask you, where do your ideas come from? They always ask you, where'd you get the idea for this character, this plot point, this whatever. Those are kind of standard elements. They also ask things like, how do you find your character's voice? How do you find your character's reason for doing things? These are all perfectly reasonable, fine, surface level questions, I think, for writers. But if you have been at it for a while, you've answered that question a lot, and at the risk of sounding like a highfalutin spectacles on the end of my snooty nose, you get asked it ad nauseum, and you just want someone to ask you a question you haven't heard before, right? Some of the questions that you don't get asked are like, when it's 4 a.m., why didn't you go to bed? Why did you keep writing this book? Questions you don't get asked are, when your kid interrupted you mid-sentence, how did you find your way back to that thought or idea? Questions you don't get asked are, when your spouse never reads any of your work but is very supportive of you as a person, how do you square that circle of external support but no external interest? These are the kinds of things that I think a lot of people deal with. But only if you're dealing with them do you care about the answer. So, I understand why the questions are the way they are.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it, because there is a different quality of question. Not that these are low quality questions, but just it's a different sort of kind of question that you get asked by somebody who's kind of has done the thing themselves, say. And very few times is a journalist in that situation.
It presupposes that anybody cares where your ideas come from, or presupposes that anyone cares what your creative process would actually be if you answered that question fully. What they really want, what people really want, is a sound bite, right? That is quotable, as opposed to an actual deep dive into the process in its constituent parts.
I always find that frustrating. It's one of the reasons I can't stand to listen to writer interviews, usually. I hate writer interview shows and writer interviews, because I find, one, inexplicably, they always are asking these surface level questions that reveal... So my pet peeve is twofold. So one is what you just said. They just don't really deep dive into the actual nuts and bolts of the creative process. I find what often people are talking about is a cliche about the creative process, and they're just discussing that. But it's not really how things work. But then the other thing I find frustrating is instantly if they haven't read the book.
Yeah. And
it's not that they need to have read the book exactly. I understand why they wouldn't read my book, but I know instantly that they haven't read the book, and it just... Now I'm like, I can't go deep with anything, and I just personally, I want to go deep dive on stuff.
Yeah, if you're going to have a conversation about something, okay, well let's first acknowledge the pace at which a radio interviewer or a TV interviewer or even a podcast interviewer gets new guests on their show. There is no way they could possibly consume.
Yeah, I get it.
So I completely understand the idea that they haven't read it, and also the listener hasn't read it either. So,
but is that still true in the internet age, in the sense of the ideally you're archiving this material and it's accessible later? When you and I were growing up, it was different. You heard a thing and then you never heard it again.
Yeah.
Now it's like I can go find Gregory Chomichuk and I can, hear an interview where he talks about his book, and I can literally save it for later, go out and read the book if I'm finding it. If I'm 10 minutes into or 20 minutes into an hour-long interview, I can just stop it and come back to it after I read the book.
Yeah.
And people do that.
Yeah, the Directors Guild of America does a podcast where directors interview each other, and often I will listen to the first 10 minutes of a podcast related to a movie I was curious whether I should take the time to see. And then, based on the sort of tantalizing tidbits of that first 10 minutes of their actual how they made it or why they made it, I often will pause it, go watch it. And so it's funny you say that because 100% true.
I think that's how a lot of people, it's not going to be everybody, but the people who really matter to you as an author are the people who might actually go out and buy and read your book, right?
So then the premise here, especially in podcast land, of the audience hasn't read it, which is, I think, usually what an interviewer is doing, is they're trying to promote the book, create interest in a book. The audience hasn't read it, so they can't talk about when Johnny is taken away, right? Because people will say, who's Johnny and where did he get taken?
But isn't it more interesting if they just explain who Johnny is and where he got taken? And like, I feel like, so my big question for the Backbone at Night, like, I would want to ask you, like, what people would call spoiler questions, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I want to ask you a question like, and I hate spoiler alert, but, let's just, spoiler alert, if you haven't read Backbone at Night, save this for later, go buy it and read it. But, in this book, there's this moment where they come, the two main characters come across, so it's a father and son, and they come across this kind of cult. It's in this reserve zone, reservation zone, where the machines, these kind of marauding, murderous machines, they're not able to enter this zone. And there's this interesting little conversation that happens there. I'm curious to know about that. I wonder if you could just explain that scene a little bit.
Okay.
And talk a bit about kind of how you came at the idea of including this scene.
So let's deconstruct, like, even the first part of our conversation was what you said. Wouldn't it be better if you explained a little bit of the context before you then answered the question? So here, for the dear listener, is the context. In the world of the automatic age, it is a world created by my love of the covers of old amazing fantasies and amazing popular science, where they would promise this world that was to come. So in the 30s, 40s, 50s, they promised this world where everything would be done for you. The kitchens would cook for you, the cars would drive for you, the sidewalks would walk for you. The best modern example, and it even isn't that modern because it's from the 80s, would be like the Jetsons, the world of the Jetsons, where just everything is perfect. So in the automatic age, this comes to pass, and then one day, at a time that they call Last Christmas, capital L, capital C, the last Christmas that ever happened, a group of automatons that they call the Autovolts arrive, one per household, knock on the door, come inside, and kill every human on Earth. And only a very tiny percentage of people who have within them a prosthetic device that the Autovolts misread as being mechanical completely sort of survive this first purge. But the automatic age cleans up the mess and goes right on doing what it's always done. It's a perfect utopia, running like clockwork, and now they're in this place, and if they turn on any light switches, they turn on a button, they turn on any of these machines, the Autovolts know, and they come. So that's the sort of the setting. And so this father and son have survived, and at one point they find a conservation zone.
Conservation zone, that's the word I was trying to remember.
And inside the conservation zone, there is a protocol. And so within that protocol, the Autovolts cannot enter a conservation zone. No automatic device is allowed to, right? The place they're in supports all green initiatives, and so there are these park areas that are like carbon recapture zones. So it's this big wilding area. And our main characters come in there and they realize there are no automations here, but there's also nothing to fear. And they find a little community that's taken shelter in there who have, they're identified as having been intentionalized. So this intentionalized community believes that as long as they don't think bad thoughts, bad things won't happen to them. They also believe that none of the robots who've killed everyone else are going to kill them because they've chosen not to believe they even exist. They just don't think about them, and they take a pill every day to help them not think about things they shouldn't.
And they're in the conservation zone where the robots don't come, so they're getting fulfilled prophecy in that sense.
And it becomes, I think, to a careful reader, very obvious that the leader of the community doesn't buy their own bullshit. They are just telling it to people so that they are elevated to a place of specialness, to a place of religious idolatry, and it is because they preach this doctrine that the robots do not come. Right? It's even more ridiculous because they say, because we don't think about the robots, they don't come. Well, the sentence itself presupposes that they understand what a robot is.
And
so
they're
they must
thinking
think
about them all the time, taking the pills,
That's right.
So it's got this self-defeating aspect to it. And of course, what's the characters realize, Kieran and Barry, what they realize initially, like almost immediately, is that, well, these people are going to get wiped out. The robots, maybe they can't, maybe their protocols in letting them come in here right now, but they will get in here eventually. There's going to be a back door, and they'll find it.
And one of the elements of the book is that Kieran, who's the father, and Bartholomew, or Barry, who is the son, have come to this place, and they're asking themselves. The father is under this, he's got this push-pull moment where there are no people left. So if my son's going to grow up as a human being, he should be around people. He should love and laugh and have community, and he should have all these things. And maybe, just maybe, I should leave him here. Even they ask him to leave. They say, it's preordained. You brought your son here, but since you won't take the pills and you won't believe what we're telling you, you're going to have to leave. And there's a moment where he is, and you kind of realize it in retrospect. As they've left the zone, you realize that he had considered it, that maybe leaving him there would have been a better thing because he got to live as a boy instead of as a creature on the run trying to survive.
So why have a scene like that in the book? Why did you include that particular scene? What was it, sort of generation of that idea, that particular scene, and why would you include that?
Okay, so 2 levels. One, as a writer of plot, it's really important to have a moment where your characters question what it is they do and why they do it, so that they can state their motivations to each other, and therefore the reader can understand their motivation. So putting them in a position where they must choose yes or no lets you understand what kind of choices they might make in a similar situation. So I just wanted that structure. Even before I knew what the scene would be, I knew I had to write a moment where Kieran would explain to Barry, if I'm your father and I'm trying to do what parents are supposed to do, I'm supposed to give you a life. And if you're supposed to have a life, what is a life? A life is among other people. That's what humans do. They're communal animals. They should live together. So if I could find anyone, is it better for you to have your dad or a community? Right? I wanted to have that sort of function. But then at the same time, we were right in the heart of a very politically charged movement in Canada, right around the pandemic. And there were all of these conspiritualists, right, who were part of the health and wellness, new age community, who were just refusing to check their own privilege, and they were just saying well, it doesn't matter, we don't have to worry about anything, I'm just thinking good thoughts, and so only good things can happen to me. And this incensed me, and I think what many authors do is they take the things that piss them off about the present day, especially science fiction authors, and they make them the premise of the future. And so that's what I did. I presented this intentionalized community that believed the same kind of nonsense, essentially. You can understand where it would come from, you can understand why it would be there, you can understand that in this little gated community where nothing bad ever comes for you, you would believe you were special or privileged. And then I had the robots dismantle it literally one brick at a time and murder all of them one by one.
Now, just jump back to the big concept of the series for a second. So remind me why these robots have come to wipe everyone out.
I make, in the first book, Automatic Age, the characters only make assumptions. In Back One of Night, they only make assumptions. Not unlike Wyndham's Day of the Triffids, there are only assumptions about the arrival of the menace. There's no concrete facts or evidence. People do not know. Like so many bad things, you don't know everything about why it's there. You can only deal with it while it's there.
Now, are you planning at some point in a later book to reveal the full backstory on that, or do you not have an interest in that?
It comes down to that last half of your sentence. Do you have an interest in that? If it became more interesting to reveal it, then I guess I'd reveal it. But as it stands right now, it's more interesting not to know. It's literally more interesting if you don't know everything. That's the nature of a mystery. And when they find out a little more each time, it's of use as they discover it. So if I present to the reader the whole picture, then there's no point in withholding the whole picture from the characters. But since I don't want the characters to have the whole picture, I can't present it to the reader, or none of the dread of the characters will be present for the reader either.
Well, you could, and that's what so many people do. This is a thing I always have to explain in creative writing classes. Like, the reader does not need to know everything. In fact, it's better if they don't know everything. Now, maybe you do at some point.
Like, I know everything.
Yeah, you need to know.
Yeah.
But like, maybe at some point, you make the decision to reveal the full story, or give at least enough pieces that could all be put together. But people will often have this tendency to just dump like info at the start of a story, and like all of a sudden, like, now you know everything that's happened in the last 3,000 years of the Earth's history.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is especially a problem I find in fantasy stories. And people just like, it's an unfamiliar world, it's an unfamiliar territory, but the characters are familiar with the world and the territory, so they'll just dump all this info on the reader.
Right.
It's like
Shakespeare, right? The past is prologue.
Yeah, and I just find like it's something people have to be trained out of, and I'm curious to know what you think about why people have that tendency when they start writing to just dump everything out.
Because we are addicted to our own cleverness.
Sure.
I think that's what it comes down to. You have a clever idea, and a secret is only cool if you know it. So you have a secret, and you immediately want to whisper it to somebody. In this case, you whisper it to the reader. Well, but now, having revealed all the secret's out.
Yeah.
Right? And so it holds no terror because you know.
I think people think that they won't be able to keep the reader interested if they don't give them a bunch of stuff up front. But then really, what's going to keep the reader interested is not having that stuff. It takes a while to kind of learn the push-pull of what the reader really wants. People make often, I find, wrong assumptions about what the reader wants. Like in a romance, they'll think the reader wants the characters to get together. Well, they don't. Once the characters are together, it's over.
Well, and because I spend a lot of time in comic book land, I can say that definitely one of the inspirations for not explaining it, Day of the Triffids for sure, but Day of the Triffids, I mean, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm pretty darn sure, was an inspiration to Robert Kirkman's Walking Dead. Because the main character, wakes up after it's all happened. He lives in the world of The Walking Dead. He sort of missed how it got there, and we don't get to see it. Just like in Day of the Triffids, he missed how it got. He's literally blinded. He missed how it got there, right? And then he's present in it. And how it happened is not as interesting as that it happened.
Sure, yeah. That's just the environment you're in now.
With the Autovolts, what I tried to do is say that how it happened is not as interesting as that it's happening, right? If you built yourself a perfect world, what are some things you could, and I allude to this, so it'd be a clever reader or listener here can probably figure out where they come from. But if you build a perfect world and you're a human being and humans are a great diaspora, I hint that they are such across the solar system that the Earth is in. Well, if you have something, others probably want it. It's as simple as that, right? People want things from other people, right?
One thing that really reminds me of is, and you talked about this already a little bit, with that old sci-fi trope of looking to the future and there being automation that was going to make your life better.
Yeah.
Then it having maybe a dark side. I always think of, you must have been thinking, you must know the story, Bradbury's story, There Will Come Soft Rains, right? but the house that keeps going, the automated house.
Yes.
Yeah, I always think of that particular story. So if people don't know this story, go out and find it. It's one of the great Ray Bradbury stories. It's called "There Will Come Soft Rains," and what it's about is there's this automatic house where every function of the house is fully automated. Like, it wakes you up in the morning, it makes your breakfast for you, it cleans the breakfast up,
brushes
it walks,
your hair,
brushes your hair. There's all the dreams of like future home automation, but there's no people anymore. There's no one who lives in the house because it's implied in the story that there's like the shadow on the wall of like where a nuclear blast clearly has gone off, and it's painted the shadow onto the wall like it did in Hiroshima. So beyond like nuclear war, these automated machines are surviving. The house is just running until it runs down, with no people to serve, but just going through the function. It's this very haunting, beautiful, chilling Bradbury story. And it always makes me think, Automatic Age makes me very much think of that. Like, you've added like a whole plot and adventure level into it.
Yeah, the adventure side is definitely there. Because here's one of the things I love reading dystopian fiction, but it got to the point where if I tried to write it, it just felt like all the dystopian fiction I had read. And so I tried to just, something as simple as flip that idea over and say, instead of a destroyed world, it's a perfect world. Everything's
perfectly
fixed,
functioning.
everything's working,
Yeah.
Every building is nice, everything is clean, the road, like, if you got there, you'd be thrilled. But if you use anything, you'll be killed, right? And so it becomes this, terrible look but don't touch, garden of earthly delights, but you can imbibe none of them kind of idea. And I just thought that was kind of fun. And then I also liked the idea that I had read this story of this apartment where it was a new build of a new condo complex, and everything was essentially airtight. It was not supposed to be, right? You're not supposed to build that way, but it had been. And so a person had died and for 2 years had decomposed and dried out perfectly in their condo, and no one knew. And they couldn't even smell it. They were just this perfect desiccated corpse, which is like sad, but in a way also as an image, haunting and kind of beautiful and kind of sad and kind of poignant, that you would open the door and the smell would be gone by then. It's 2 years later, and it's just this dried out thing that was once a person. And so if you were moving through a world that one day decided, we're not opening any of these doors anymore, whatever you got in there, right? So if you have that automatic room, you can live in there for the entire length of your life. It's going to make you food, it's going to make you coffee, it's going to stream you content, but you can never leave that room until you expire, and then that's your tomb. Right? I liked this concept. And so, and so then I said, okay, well, that's only one step, right? That like the automatic cars stop opening their doors, so people are just endlessly looping. One of my favorite images in the Automatic Age is that the freeways and all these pod cars and all these electric, automatic, solar-powered cars just one day lock all their doors. On the night of last Christmas, they lock all their doors and don't let anyone out. And so there's this great, endlessly driving freeway cemetery of all the people that could never leave their cars. And it just goes over and over. It never stops, and it's solar powered, and it's self-replacing, and it's just always happening. And this becomes a huge barrier to Barrie and Kirian, where they have to cross the freeway, and it's 10 lanes in both directions, so it's 20 lanes of freeway of these bullet things shooting by with corpses in them, and they now have to play a game of Frogger to get across it, essentially. And I just, it starts, for me anyway, writing starts with those kinds of images and those scenarios, and then trying to sort of string them along the clothesline of the plot, if you will.
Talk a bit about, you mentioned the images in the book, so you actually literally have a bunch of images in this book, much more than a normal book. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about your work as an illustrator on this book and kind of some of the way you designed, and how the physical book looks.
Well, the physical book, if we're just going to talk design elements for a second, so Adam's book had this beautiful format, which I really liked, and I used for Shared World, and I used it for Red Earth, and it's just this little 5x7.
The ones to make it through.
The ones
to make it
to
through.
make it through.
That's what it was.
So I became obsessed with it simply for its function. It's little, it fits in your pocket. It's kind of a single serving story. I liked that. I'd forgotten about it in terms of prose, and had stolen that format for comics and comics adjacent projects like Red Earth. But then I read You Were Never Really Here on an hour-and-a-half plane ride from, I forget, I was in Vancouver to maybe Washington or something like that.
Whose book is that? You Were Never Really Here?
Again, we're the worst. You're going to look it up.
Okay.
The point is, I loved it, but what I liked the most about it, it was a complete story that I could read on a plane ride. And it basically mirrored Adam's, it reinvigorated me to the format of this little book.
Jonathan Amy's book?
That's the one. Yeah. So it reinvigorated me to the format of the book. And so I had this short story that I called Heart Hole at the time, that I told myself, if I expand this, too short to be airplane length, which is how I started thinking about it, right? But what could I add to it? And what I did add to it turned it into the automatic age. And because I was also had done Red Earth, which was all pictures and a little bit of text in that same format, I thought it would be fun to flip that. So this was me, it was all about process. I had done a book that was mostly drawings and a little bit of text, and so I wanted to take a book that was mostly text and put in a little bit of drawings. And then I said, those illustrations will not be spot illustrations, which anyone familiar with opening a book that has illustrations, you read the book, then you find some artist's interpretation of an event in the book. That's a spot illustration. I wanted the illustration to be the next page of the book. So you read that paragraph, then you look to the facing page, and there happens to be a picture of a robot. That's that page. Read the picture. Then when you turn the page, that's the next thing that's happening. So kind of like, it's hilarious because we're talking so much about books and we keep forgetting all the authors and all the designers of every book we mention. But I'm going to charge over here.
Drinking too much coffee today. He's going to grab a book that my daughter lent his kid, which is, so is that the one you had read?
Selznick, yeah. So Selznick.
Brian Selznick,
yeah,
who did a great book called
Wonderstruck.
Wonderstruck. My more favorite book of his is The Invention of Hugo Cabret. But he does a really brilliant. But he has a very brilliant style. He initially was just a book illustrator, and then he had like for children's books, and then he did his own children's book, and then he started doing this kind of young adult books where they have long sequences of illustrations for 30 pages, 70 pages of illustration, then interspersed. Then it'll just switch over to prose. For 30, 70 pages or whatever, and I'll switch back to illustration. He has a really, the invention of Hugo Cabret was the one that won a bunch of awards and was really big.
So what happens in just for the, because it's a audio presentation, the reader then is flipping from picture as story to prose as story, and they're intended to be seamless. So I wanted to approach this idea in the automatic age. There are, for example, some 2-page spreads in the automatic age, which I think that's the point in which a reader, they might be, 50, it's about 50 pages in, where you would finally realize that these are not spot illustrations. Because what I've described as the place they are in the last chapter, and the 2-page spread is a very different place than where they go when the writing resumes. So you must therefore infer they went here. And that's the story of them going here. That's all you need to know, is they went here and they kept walking. They didn't go inside, right? But here is a beautiful luxury condominium with all the delights therein that they cannot go inside, right? I also have a scene where Well, this is all circles around. This is how I know whether people are visually literate or just literate. Because a reviewer and an interviewer said, like, I just can't figure out how in automatic age the autovolt tracks them down. Like, it's cool that he just shows up, but wouldn't it be neat to know how he tracked them? And I said, well, there's a very, very specific illustration that tells you exactly how he tracked them. And, they're confused and they're a little annoyed. And I said, well, if you go back, you'll see there's a picture of that autovolt. And they're like, yeah, I see it, and he's all broken up in the mirrors, and it's like a reflection, and what a creepy image. I'm like, okay, but look more closely at that image, and you will see there are fingerprints on the glass, which tells you that the autovolts, once they have found a person, can literally read their fingerprints and follow those fingerprints wherever they've gone and just keep looking for them, right? But it's not stated, ever.
Well, but why would it be? Because you're not writing from the auto points. The autovolt isn't a narrative focal point.
That's right. So it gives me the ability to have the autovolt be a narrative focal point in pictures without being a character, right?
Sure, yeah.
So we get to cut to the monster for a moment without writing about it. Because once we write about it, I have to reveal too much. I have to tell you too much about it, how it works, how it sees, how it thinks, how it does all these things in order for you to understand it as a character. I have to humanize it in order for it to have a point of view. Didn't want to, so instead use pictures.
Half the point of that thing is that it's not a human. It's not acting like a human. It doesn't have the thought pattern of a human. It's got this different way of thinking, or whatever approximates thinking for it. It's following the protocols. And you don't want to be writing out the protocols.
Right. I did write them out.
But you're right though. What people will otherwise do is they'll anthropomorphize the thing's viewpoint, which I always find I don't like in books. Like I like
monsters. I like it just fine.
I don't like it personally.
Yeah.
I find it is it doesn't keep it alien. And what's interesting to me is when the thing has an alien point of view and it can't be understood.
Mm-hmm.
Like to me, if you're in the world of monsters especially, like that's where the monsters are interesting.
See, and that just comes down to preference. So like you're asking about why
you don't want to know what Hannibal Lecter really is thinking.
Right.
Right? You just want to understand his mind is so far beyond yours.
Sure. Again, that's mileage may vary.
Yeah, sure. It depends.
Right. So for me, I like it when I don't know things about the villains, about the world. I like to discover a little on the way. I like to be forced to remember a detail from early in a book that now matters without it being recapped. I love that kind of writing. I'm sure my agent is cringing and publishers are saying, yeah, but readers don't like that, most readers. So maybe I'm limiting myself, but if you're not making what I'm in a position where the writing I do, I'm not beholden to some massive audience. So I don't have to make choices that you would have to make for a massive audience. You may not, as Stuart McLean would say, you may not be big, but you're small. And so because I'm small enough, I can fit into a little niche where someone who likes the puzzle, who likes not to know it all, who wants the ride, but not the tour backstage, right, can read those books. There's plenty of ride in these stories. Right, you run for your life all through Automatic Age and all through Backbone and Night. You are running for your life, but you don't always know why.
Is that one reason that you are using these very short clipped chapters? Is that partly for this pacing reason?
Yeah. And there's another side of it too. Is the book itself is so small. Long chapters don't lend itself to a short book. At least. I suppose they could. This short book does not lend itself to long chapters. I want them to be moving from place to place on a pretty regular clip. I want you to be exposed to a large amount of world without having to read a large amount of exposition. So short little vignettes of them in strange places. And what they all have in common is the characters either observe something they know to be true, or they learn something that they thought was false, right? It's like they kind of, that's what each of the scenes has in common, or why I would place it there. And not all of it is obvious on the first read, but the book is short enough that if you're like, why would you include that? You could read it again and be like, oh, Yes.
The other book, reminds me of a little bit also of Cormac McCarthy's The Road.
Sure.
It's not like it in many ways.
Yeah.
But
in the ways that Cormac McCarthy can write a better sentence in 2 minutes than I can write a whole novel
McCarthy
in a year.
is unnatural.
Yeah.
There's a word in that book, The Road. I've ever told you about this. There's a word in that book where at one point he talks about the saladator drying from the earth. And if you actually, and I was reading this book and I was like, saladator. And I tried to look it up in a dictionary. It's not in the dictionary. I do more research into it. Cormac McCarthy is like the first person to use this word in like 400 years. It was previously used by some monk to describe, the God's grace in the world. Like it's a word to sort of suggest the suggestiveness of God's grace, like when it seems to be apparent in an object.
Right.
Or in something. So the idea that McCarthy is getting at
just
is
the
that,
right word to have this be 400 years old.
It's exactly, and it's like that's like a preternatural ability that he's developed and honed at that
I wonder,
point.
do you collect words like baubles or gems in little notebooks or anything, like when you find just the
I
right
should.
word?
Well, once I found
I do
saladator, I
sometimes,
was
yeah.
like, maybe I should start doing this. But what is in The Road is that father-son dynamic. It's these two characters in a kind of apocalyptic scenario, and they're traveling towards kind of a somewhat unknown destination.
Yeah, you could triangulate the automatic age as The Road meets the Jetsons by way of The Walking Dead,
and that Bradbury story maybe as well.
Definitely.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it, though. The Road, Walking Dead, and the Jetsons. I love that.
Right. Imagine
strange mix.
Yeah. Imagine Rosie has just had enough. Right.
It's got that pulp, because it's got that pulp aspect in it where it's not like it's a laugh a minute, but like there's that like fun of it. You know.
Well, the idea is that the automatic age came out of the it's sort of like weaponized capitalism resulted in the automatic age almost by accident. Like if the powers that had been thinking, they wouldn't have replaced themselves with robots, right? Because once you take away the need for labor, you have no control over a population, right? You need to have them laboring in order to have any agency or authority over them, because the labor produces the thing they need to live in the world that you govern. So once that's removed, there's this whole scaffolding, and I've been accused. When Automatic Age came out, one of my favorite / least favorite reviews I saw was somebody saying like, "Oh, Chomichuk is clearly a communist. He doesn't want," right? Which is tacitly untrue, but it's interesting that they see that in the work, that characters who are fictional, who are evaluating a world that used to be based on capital and is now based on luxury, right? Where you can have anything you want, anytime you want, but they still pay for things with these coins, which they call labor. So you put labor in and you get what you want. But it's so removed, the population doesn't even remember what labor was, right? That's how luxurious the world they're in, right? They don't know how to do anything. Yet, that same world still has war. And the father is a war veteran. And so clearly it's all a lie. It's just a propaganda machine that says you have everything you want. Well, who are you at war with if you have everything you want? Right? You can't possibly have everything you want, or you wouldn't have war. You want something else. You went to get it and you took it from someone. And so all of these things are kind of baked into the fabric without me telling you in a 3-paragraph introduction, here's the history of the world. But if you read carefully, you can realize that the world was fractioned, right, and factioned, and struggled against itself before it reached some kind of equilibrium, and that a peace was brought, and one of the things that brought the peace was this lifting of labor, and it had catastrophic results on humankind, right? If you can't do what you're made to do, what is your purpose? Is one of the underlying themes that is explored in many ways, from many points of view.
Yeah, and the autovolts are in a different way just sort of doing the thing they were made to do.
They're doing what they're made to do.
Perfectly.
Yeah.
And with precision. And yet it's, generating this nightmare for these remaining people in this
and
world.
without malice.
Yeah, without malice. But I always think that's more interesting. Like we Gregory and I also have a comic that we're making with heavy metal called The Eye Collector, and one of I think the great things about the monster in The Eye Collector is he is without malice. He's literally creating a nightmare world for these people.
Yeah, and in The Eye Collector is neat because curiosity seems to be the driving factor in our monster. Sort of like a pleasant, wish-fulfilling curiosity. Like, if I could just figure out how people work, I could give them what they want, and wouldn't that be the best thing ever? So
but I've got to do experiments to see.
So I got to figure out what makes them tick, like taking them apart.
But I think that lack of malice is creepier. Like, the Autobolts are creepier because they don't necessarily hate these humans.
In fact, they introduce themselves to every human they see. Every time that Barry and Kyrian meet an Autobolt, the reason they've survived so long is that the Autobolts have a protocol of being polite. And so they ask people that they cannot identify necessarily as people, if they are in fact people.
Yeah.
So they will say, like, oh, I believe you're a human occupant. Can you prove that you are not before I undertake your murder? And because Barry is able to say, no, I'm automatic and I can prove it, he has the lower half of his body is prosthetic. And so he's able to plug into the Autovolts, and he uses a design flaw in his own prosthetics to dump his battery, his stored charge from his legs, into the Autovolt, killing them. So when they're supposed to be making this exchange to prove, it's like, imagine you could meet a person and they extend their hand to shake your hand, and then when you shook hands, you electrocuted them.
Yeah,
that's
the way
essentially what
the way this plays out in the book is very much like this in this polite exchange, like Gregory is saying. Like, the machine walks up and says, "Hi, I'm machine whatever.
Yeah.
I'm here to slaughter you. Please, I'm machine whatever. Please introduce yourself." Meanwhile, it's like holding a gun, basically, right?
Because what if they're wrong?
And
right?
things like, I'm, and then Barry, or Kieran then says, "Oh, I'm, whatever," and the thing goes incorrect. You are a human occupant, and he goes, "No, exchange to verify," and then they start doing the handshake.
And then they plug each other's. They plug their, micro USBs into each other.
That's why I'm saying there's like a interesting humorous aspect to it. Like the politeness of the thing that's got like a knife there ready to stab him. If second it verifies he's a human occupant.
But the other side is that it only has a knife because it ran out of the more efficient tool.
Yeah.
Already.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right, and so they meet Autovolts in various states of disrepair, ones that are brand new and are still armed, and other ones that have used every means of their disposal and they're just basically a wreck of their former selves. But what the Autovolts have still, as part of their protocol, is this politeness to verify first beforehand. And as soon as there's a shadow of a doubt, they don't attack, which is, by the way, much better than how most humans behave. Right? It is my indictment of how humans make war.
But it's also creepier, I think, don't you think? Like, there's something creepy. I don't even know what it would be exactly, but there's something creepy and disturbing about a creature that is doing horrible things to you, but doesn't even intend to.
Yeah.
Necessarily. It's just doing what it does. And there's a sort of dispassionate aspect of it where it's kind of almost taking you apart and it just wants to see what happens. Like, I feel like there's something, it's the same sort of like terror of like when a kid takes a bug apart, like there's just something horrible about the fact, it's weird, but there's something horrible about the fact that they don't even intend necessarily to be hurting the thing.
Well, and the Autobolts themselves are see-through. You can see through their skin to the mechanisms beneath, which, metaphorically, it serves as sort of narrative purpose also, right? Like Barry and Kyrian can see them coming, they see what they really are, they see them for what they are, just puppets, marionettes, machines, following a protocol. And so they can, in their own mind, have no reluctance to destroy them. But I take a fairly luxurious amount of time describing the suffering of the Audibles, right? Where they have been injured horrifically and they're just trying to do what they are designed to do. They have no malice, but the things they've found and encounters have had great malice against them. Which is kind of try to subvert that.
Well, I think that's an important thing whenever you're doing a story too, is just figuring out what are the different ways you can attack the theme. I find too often when I'm dealing with writers that they'll be married to some viewpoint they have, and they won't realize that the only way to get that viewpoint across effectively is to try to get the other viewpoints in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then you got this war of perspectives, and then they start to vie for, you know, dominance in a manner of speaking. And, you know, if you've set the story up right, your perspective will win out in a manner of speaking. But where people will make the mistake is they'll just want to be too didactic. Like they'll want to just get the point across, and they won't give the counterpoint its fair share.
Yeah.
That's why Thanos is such a great villain, right? Because Thanos is right. If you look at like what he has to say, his point of view is correct.
Yeah, if you take the pressure off, people will be happier. And in a way that...
And that's what's so chilling about it, you know, is that, like, especially if you look at the movie Thanos, you know, when he comes to these planets, he slaughters half the people, and then as he points out, you know, 1,000 years later, they're doing better.
Movie Thanos is harder to identify with for me than comic book Thanos, who does it for love.
Yeah, but
right?
but on both
he's
sides,
you know, it's as awful as it sounds. He's paying his dowry to death.
Yeah, I do like
with
prefer
half
comic
the
book
universe,
Thanos.
but he just wants.
But I think
he loves
what's interesting about movie Thanos is it's a better illustration of that, making a villain that has their reasons,
mm-hmm.
and their reasons are sound.
Right.
So it's not that you should accept that he's right, but he is right on a certain level, and
right.
you have to deal with it, the
yeah.
fact that he's right on that level, and like you have to make a stronger counter argument now. It's not just a straw man. I find so often people will set up a straw man enemy to make their point in a weaker fiction. So what I like about the Autovolts is that they have this accurate perspective in a manner of speaking.
Yeah, like it's true. The Earth is better off without people.
On a certain level, sure.
Yeah. On almost every level.
Except for, of course, from the perspective of these people.
Right?
And you could argue that that's an important perspective.
Like the ecosystem functioning, the Autovolts see the one thing that harms the ecosystem the most as the thing that's got to go.
And that's almost one of the same themes that you see in the Matrix.
Right.
At least the first Matrix is that same idea.
Yeah.
And you know,
but
they express the idea that humans are a virus potentially. They operate they classify them as a virus. You know,
yeah.
So
but you heard it here, folks. I heard it here first, folks. That is not the reason the Autovolts killed him, right?
Sure.
It just becomes the obvious reason people would see when reading.
But also, I think what's powerful about is like to make a counter argument that somehow people are worth having around. Requires that you seriously consider the converse argument,
yeah.
and you put that perspective in the story. You know, I find like that's the thing that makes a really powerful story often is that the themes are playing out rather than like the story has a point.
Right.
Like there's various points and they're playing out against one another, and you've got this debate going.
So. One of the things that I tried to do, like with that scene we talked about earlier, with the intentionalized community, right?
That's why I bring that one up.
My thesis here is not that Barry and Kieran are better than them. The premise that I'm exploring is when calamity occurs, what kind of societal or interpersonal structures are best suited to survive calamity? Ones that believe in wishing or ones that believe in doing? Well, obviously people who do things are going to survive a calamity more than people who are simply wish for things, but
But in the meantime, they're not necessarily having as good a time.
That's right. They're not having as good a time.
You could argue that the wishful thinking, at least they get to have their paradise for a little bit.
Right, and that is literally what is presented. They live in the garden, they are unaffected by the evils of the world, and when it's over for them fast.
Mm-hmm.
So would you rather live, would you rather live in ignorance and bliss? Would you rather live in intelligence and terror? Is essentially what is presented in the backbone of men.
I was reading a finance book recently, and the author said in it, at one point he's talking about his friend's home was robbed, and the thieves took all the televisions and left all her books. And he says, and we have the same choice to make. He's like, you can go buy books, or you can go buy a television. And I thought it was such a brilliant, sort of way to encapsulate just what value education has versus, this kind of passive reception of things. Not that I'm anti-television, but I thought the metaphor was so clever that people, because of course the implication here is that people willingly just let the world steal their books from them. Right. That when the thieves come take your TV but leave your books, you just focus on the fact that your TV is gone.
Right.
And it is a perspective sort of thing that comes into play now, and you don't think about how you've sort of robbed yourself by buying the TV in the first place in some ways.
Well, I think it bears pointing out that the missing thing in this case, if we're talking about things taken, Kieran is a veteran, and he has prosthetic limbs, and he has a prosthetic chassis, and those things have been taken from him. But I don't really I spend maybe only about 300 words talking about the sort of downside of that from Kieran's perspective. And the rest of it is just how it is. And this is because I grew up with a father who had prosthetic limb, where I didn't quite realize as a young boy that everyone didn't have that. That's how normalized it was in our household. And so I wanted to try and recapture that idea with Kieran being a father who's lost an enormous something, what other people would value greatly. And he doesn't spend any time whinging about it through the whole book. And in fact, when the chips are down, the thing he lost is what keeps his son alive. So he traded it. And wouldn't you trade anything for that? I mean, which is a trite thing to say, because a lot of people wouldn't. There are a lot of people out there who don't trade much for their own kids, and I wanted to set up kind of a parable, it's almost a fairy tale of what a father is willing to give up for his son.
I used to know a guy who had 2 prosthetic legs, and he'd walk around in them. He was perfectly functional for walking. But I remember every time somebody would ask him about what happened to his legs, he would say, "Well, it's a great story. Remind me to tell you sometime." Then he'd walk away. So nobody actually knew.
Because being defined by that
exactly.
is such a ridiculous thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And
meanwhile, he's walking. His point was I'm literally walking around. Why are you talking about how I don't have legs?
Yeah, and even if you're not, that isn't the salient point to be made here. And even the main character. So there's 2 main characters, but it's really in book 1 it's Kieran, and in Backbone of Night it's more Barry,
mm-hmm.
right? Has his evolution into the main character. But in the first one, Kieran is not spending any time thinking about what he lost. He's thinking about literally putting one foot in front of the other, because as long as he's moving, there's a chance for his son to survive. He doesn't even know where he's going until the very end, where he realizes what it is he's fighting for.
That's why it makes me think of The Road, where you've got that same dynamic, and you have a similar sort of way in which it starts to become more and more the son emerging as a character,
right.
And learning, both by following and by kind of questioning his father's actions, like what he maybe should be doing and how he could survive this world. And you've got both characters that are growing up in this world. One of the great moments in The Road is where the kid asks about, the father says, it'll be such and such, take us 2 days as the crow flies. And the kid goes, starts asking what that means.
Yeah. What's a crow?
Because he's never seen a crow. He's like, oh, it just means to go in a straight line. And then there's like a moment where it's silent, and the kid goes, there are no crows anymore, are they? Are there? He's like, no. He's like, maybe on the moon? He's like, they couldn't fly to the moon.
So things like that. There are a lot of moments like that in this book where the son questions. But the son's been around long enough to know how things work.
Yeah, because the weird flip side of it is like, on one hand, he's not prepared for this world and he's just a kid and so on. But the other side of it is like, because he's growing up in it, he's not making the same assumptions that his father's making,
Right.
based on how the world used to work. That the guy doesn't even realize he's making.
Right.
And this is where the same sort of thing comes in the road, and always makes me think of that. As it's got that same sort of thing where you start to see slowly over time, like things that Kieran is doing that maybe he doesn't even realize he's kind of doing.
Oh, he's trapped in a paradigm. That's 100%.
He's trapped in a paradigm. That's the best way to put it.
Yeah, he's trapped in a paradigm that I wish the world was the way it was so my son could grow up the way it was. But Barry is growing up in the world as it is. And so kids, my kids are the same age as Barry's supposed to be, they are infinitely adaptable. Oh, this is how it is now. Oh, this is how it is now. Oh, this is how it is now. It's no problem for them. And so I wanted to have those two things. It's very gratifying for me to hear you say that you caught those elements in it, because I wondered, should I have spent more time developing that or ratcheting that tension? But the last line of Automatic Age, or almost the last line, is this idea that they're going to go looking. Where are they going now? They're going to go look for a place where the future didn't happen, right? But what is meant by that, from Kieran's perspective as he answers it, is I'm going to stop promising you things. We're just going to take things as they are. And I'm not going to tell you it's going to be better. I can't. That's actually a lie, because chances are it'll be worse, right? So we're not going to promise how the future's going to be. And in the Backbone of Night, they've been through many misadventures, unstated. They refer to a few of them, but we didn't see those adventures. And I think it's more clear that Kieran is very honest. Whenever Barry asks him, like, is it going to be good or bad? He's like, well, probably bad. We'll try to make it good, but it'll probably get really bad, right? And so he's not lying about what's happening. And as a result, I think Barry is more able to deal with what happens than if he had been told it would all work out, which is ultimately the responsibility of science fiction writers. Do I think robots are going to come and kill us all? No. Have I seen all the Atlas videos? Do I track Boston Dynamics development in robotic? Constantly. I'm always looking at it. I'm super fascinated by it. Do I think an army of killer robots is going to come and get us? I do not. Right? It's just not within our realm. Too many humans would have to cooperate to build an army of killer robots. And humans do not have at their core the capacity at this stage to cooperate to that degree. Right? So no, I don't think killer robots are coming. It's fun to explore the idea, and everyone's like, oh, the robots, everyone references the Terminator. Automatic Age could not be further from the Terminator in its plot or reason for existing. But it's the one pop culture references all the time when someone hasn't read the book and wants to talk about Automatic Age. Oh, are the robots coming for us? Are they going to take over? No, they're not interested in taking over. They're interested in removing humans, but they don't want to be in charge. That's a human perspective.
Any final thoughts on the Automatic Age?
In this spoiler-filled interview, if you have read the book, thank you so much for reading it and caring enough to listen to this podcast after the fact to find out what we actually thought and why I did it. And if you are curious about reading the book, I will encourage you to buy either The Backbone of Night or The Automatic Age. They're written so that you can read either in either order.
Well, thanks for talking to me, Gregory, and keep writing the wrong one.
Thanks for having me, John.